This is Omni-Fi. If you enjoy sci-fi stories about humanity at its best, subscribe now.
The air in the archive of all things tasted of ozone and old paper, a sterile breath that carried the weight of a billion histories. Kalen Vance stood before the designated interface, a slab of obsidian that pulsed with a soft, internal light. The request had been specific, routed through 7 layers of diplomatic clearance. Access to the Quadrant 7 Annex, specifically the chronicles of the Jkar and of Shock. The archive, a sentient entity of pure data, had granted it without comment. It did not judge. It merely remembered. Before him, the light resolved into 2 images, side by side. The Jkar, their 4-limbed forms a study in elegant efficiency, their fur a deep, burnished bronze. Their history was one of creation, of logic, of building machines so complex they were indistinguishable from life. The Shock, their simian cousins, were rougher, their gray fur matted, their movements a frantic, chaotic dance. Their history was one of adaptation, of scavenging, of repurposing the Jkar's discarded works into brutal, unpredictable contraptions. For 312 years, they had been at war. The archive presented the data without sentiment, a series of escalating raids, sabotage, and reprisals. The Jkar would build a new stellar forge, and the Shock would tear it apart. The Shock would jury-rig a fleet of scavenger ships, and the Jkar would systematically dismantle them. It was a cycle of violence as predictable as the turning of a gear. Kalen was not a soldier. He was a cultural attaché, a specialist in xenosociology. His hands, pale and human, rested on the cool surface of the console. He felt the faint thrum of the archive's processing, a vibration that traveled up his arms and settled in his bones. He had reviewed the official reports, the terse military communiques that spoke of hostile actions and strategic assets. They were useless. They treated the Jkar and Shock as forces of nature, not peoples. He needed the raw data, the unfiltered memories. He had requested access to the sensory logs embedded within the archive, the subjective experiences of the participants. He began to sift, his fingers tracing complex patterns in the air. He pulled up a memory from a Jkar machinist, a female named Lyra. The world sharpened. The air was thick with the scent of molten metal and coolant. Lyra's 4 hands moved with a surgeon's precision, calibrating a resonator core that hummed with a low, powerful note. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a device that could stabilize the quantum foam of a micro-wormhole. Her thoughts, translated by the archive, were a stream of pure logic. Asterisk efficiency, purity, purpose. Asterisk she was not building a weapon. She was building art. Then, a blaring klaxon. The Shock. They came not in ships, but in boarding pods, silent and brutal. The memory became a cacophony of destruction. The Shock, their faces twisted in what the archive labeled agitation, tore at the resonator with crude tools, their 4 hands grabbing and pulling, indifferent to the delicate symphony of its design. Lyra's thoughts shifted from logic to a cold, analytical fury. Asterisk contamination, defilement, waste. Asterisk the memory ended with the resonator core overloading in a silent, blue flash, incinerating everything in the chamber. Kalen pulled back, his breath catching in his throat. He felt a cold anger himself, a primal urge to defend the beautiful, ordered thing that had been so mindlessly destroyed. He found a corresponding memory from the Shock, a male named Grak. The sensory shift was jarring. The air smelled of rust and unwashed fur. Grak was in a salvage yard, a graveyard of broken Jkar machines. He was not a destroyer. He was a scavenger. His people had no forges of their own. They took what the Jkar discarded and made it their own, a brutal, functional poetry of necessity. He was working on a salvaged atmospheric processor, his thick fingers splicing together mismatched wires, bypassing safety protocols. He needed it to work, to filter the toxic air of their asteroid. The diplomatic shuttle, a sterile white egg, descended through the violet atmosphere of the neutral moon-designated sanctuary. Kalen stared out the viewport at the desolate landscape, a cratered wasteland of gray rock and dust. Below, in a vast, circular depression, the 2 delegations waited. The Jkar stood in a rigid, geometric formation, their bronze fur gleaming under the harsh light of the system's binary stars. They were silent, statues of perfect order. The Vshak, a ragged cluster of gray-furred figures, shifted restlessly, their movements jerky and anxious. They were a study in chaos. Kalen's aide, a young man named Jorik, shifted beside him. Sir, the preliminary briefings were unproductive. The Jkar ambassador, Theris, referred to the Vshak as uncalibrated variables. The Vshak spokesperson, a female named Zara, called them hoarding rust-eaters. I'm aware, Jorik, Kalen said, his voice flat. He wasn't looking at Jorik. He was watching the two groups. He saw the chasm between them, not just physically, but philosophically. They were two alien species, each utterly convinced of the rightness of their own worldview, and utterly incapable of understanding the other. His orders were simple: broker a peace. The Galactic Council was tired of the noise, the drain on resources. They wanted a final solution. Kalen knew that a treaty, a piece of paper, would be meaningless. The war was a disease of the soul, and a treaty was just a bandage. The shuttle touched down with a barely perceptible shudder. The ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics. Kalen stepped out, his polished boots sinking slightly into the fine dust. He walked forward, his gait measured, his hands clasped behind his back. He stopped a dozen paces from the two delegations, a neutral buffer between order and chaos. He did not speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, letting the tension of the moment settle over everyone. The Jkar's stillness was unnerving. The Vshak's fidgeting was a nervous energy that practically hummed in the air. Welcome to Sanctuary, Kalen finally said, his voice calm, carrying easily in the thin atmosphere. He looked first at Theris, the Jkar ambassador. Her forearms were folded across her chest, her dark, intelligent eyes fixed on him. Ambassador Theris. And to you, Zara, of the Vshak. He nodded to the Vshak spokesperson, whose sharp, darting eyes never left him. We are not here for pleasantries, human, Theris stated, her voice a series of precise, clicking modulations. The Vshak continue their predation. Their latest incursion cost us the Arcturus relay node. A loss of efficiency we cannot tolerate. Zara snorted, a rough, guttural sound. The Arcturus relay node was a junk heap you were using to block our sensor arrays. We were just repurposing the parts. You build your shiny toys and then get mad when we try to stay alive. Survival does not necessitate the systematic dismantling of superior technology, Theris countered, her tone remaining perfectly flat, but her hands tightened slightly. Your actions are illogical, destructive. Your superior technology is useless to us. Zara's voice rose, her frustration boiling over. It's a language we don't speak. You build things that are beautiful and perfect, and then you lock them away, while we starve in the shadow of your greatness. The argument was a familiar, hopeless loop. Kalen let them go for a moment, watching the dynamic. He saw the truth of it laid bare. The Jkar's cruelty was one of cold indifference. They would let the Vshak perish because their existence was inefficient, an error in a perfect equation. The Vshak's cruelty was born of desperation. The proposal, when Kalen finally articulated it, was met with a silence so profound it seemed to suck the air from the crater. He stood before them, the image of the Jkar stellar forge and the Vshak salvage yard projected in the air between them, a visual representation of the chasm he intended to bridge. You will build together, Kalen said, his voice calm but firm. The Jkar will design a new stellar forge, but it will be more than a forge. It will be a symbiotic engine. The Vshak will not be scavengers in its shadow. They will be its caretakers. They will maintain it, not with the Jkar's delicate precision, but with their own brutal, effective pragmatism. They will scavenge for the raw materials. They will perform the heavy repairs. They will keep it running when the Jkars are focused on design. Theris's arms were now completely still, but her posture was rigid. To entrust a Jkar design to the unrefined methods of the Vshak? It is unthinkable. They would introduce errors. Instability. Your designs are too perfect, Kalen shot back, his tone sharp. They are brittle. They break. The Vshak's methods are chaotic, but they are resilient. They can fix things you would consider irreparable. They are the anvil to your hammer. He looked at Zara. And you, Zara. You would not be tearing down what you do not understand. You would be given the tools to understand it. You would be taught the language of the machine, not just how to jury-rig it. You would be given a purpose, a place, not as second-class citizens, but as essential partners. The forge will be your home as much as theirs. Its success will be your success. Zara stared at the image of the forge, her expression unreadable. Her people had always been on the outside, looking in. The idea of being inside, of being needed, was a foreign concept. Why would they do this? She asked, her voice rough. Why would the Jakar let us touch their precious machines? Because it is the only way to stop the war, Kalen said simply. Because the alternative is annihilation for one or both of you. The Galactic Council is losing patience. This is your only chance. He turned his gaze fully on Theris. And you, Ambassador, you will teach them. You will show them the beauty of your work. In doing so, you will force them to see you not as enemies, but as creators. You will force them to rise to your level, and in doing so, you will see them for what they are, survivors, not vandals. The silence stretched again, broken only by the wind whispering across the dust. The Jakar delegation conferred in a series of low clicks and whistles, a language of pure information exchange. The Vshak huddled together, their rough voices a low, guttural argument. Kalen waited, his heart a cold, hard stone in his chest. He knew he was asking them to do the impossible, to unlearn 3 centuries of hatred. He was a surgeon, and he was about to cut into the most infected wound in the sector, hoping he didn't kill the patient in the process. Finally, Theris stepped forward. Her movements were deliberate, precise. She stopped at the dividing line, her gaze fixed on Kalen. The first 6 months were a descent into hell. The designated site for the forge was a barren asteroid in the belt between Jakar and Vshak space. The initial construction, overseen by Theris, was a masterpiece of Jakar engineering. The framework rose, a latticework of crystalline alloys, humming with contained power. The Vshak, under Zara's direction, were tasked with preparing the site, excavating the asteroid's core to provide a stable foundation. It was simple, brutal labor, and they threw themselves into it with a desperate energy. But the piece was a fragile veneer. The tension was a palpable thing, a sour taste in the recycled air of the temporary habitation modules. The Jakar worked in silence, their movements a silent ballet of efficiency. The Vshak worked with a roar of grunts and the clang of iron on rock. They were 2 different species sharing a space, but not a world. Kalen acted as a constant mediator, a buffer between their clashing cultures. He would spend his mornings with Theris, reviewing the complex schematics, and his afternoons with Zara, trying to explain the principles of structural integrity to a people who understood only survival. The breaking point came during the installation of the primary energy conduit. The Jakars had laid a section of the conduit, a flawless, seamless tube of neutron-compressed metal. A Vshak work crew, led by a burly male named Rock, was tasked with securing it to the asteroid's bedrock. Rock, in a fit of what he called.
Thanks for watching Omni-Fi. If this story hooked you, there are plenty more where that came from.